All right, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
This week's Parsha is Bo, which a lot of times is translated as
Go.
Or come.
Come.
Come. It's supposed to be
Yes.
come.
It's a lot of times it's translated as go
But
to
it's
Pharaoh,
not
but
what it
Bo is imperative for come. When you study Hebrew, you'll find that it is with an exclamation point. So come. All right, which is interesting. Thought to go to Pharaoh versus come to Pharaoh. That Yahweh says this to Moshe, come to Pharaoh. Interesting, kind of thought-provoking. When you think of the Exodus story, the English word for this book is Exodus, which puts the focus on the Exodus from Egypt, and the idea that we translate this as go is almost in that same thought-provoking focus of to go. It's the leaving, but yet in the Father's mind, this is about drawing the people unto Himself. And so to translate it as come imperatively and to take another look at this, and rather than focusing on the Exodus, it's the arrival, the point at which they're going to is where they're coming to. They're coming to Yahweh.
Oh.
So just kind of a little short snippet of a message from that. Thank you, Mom, for pointing that out last week's Hebrew lesson. Okay, so I am going to get into this Parsha, and I have some things to talk about. But prior to doing that, I want to start off by talking about a couple things that don't seem to relate. And for those sitting in this room, they'll be like, maybe you'll be like, I've heard this before. Not word for word, but the same idea conveyed. But I think it's really important that I continue to talk about this because it is a message of Faith Shalom. So if I continue to reiterate this point from here, then hopefully it'll get so ingrained into each one of you that as we grow and more people come, that this message gets communicated not just in front of the pulpit. I need to come up, turn it off,
On.
on.
Everything
Am I
is
on? Hello?
Alright, there you go.
Okay.
Couldn't hear you, buddy.
Can you hear me now? Okay, is that better? So this idea, I want this conveyed beyond the pulpit. So not just when I'm standing here talking, but when you guys are talking amongst one another, that this kind of gets ingrained to you as the culture of Faith Shalom. And it's the idea that, when you have somebody who's standing up here as teacher, this idea of the teacher has the knowledge which you are trying to get. This idea of the teacher is the one who knows, and the student is the one who needs to learn. But my definition of a good teacher would be a teacher who inspires the students to learn, not to aspire to the level of the teacher. Okay, so the teacher has all the knowledge and they're trying to bring the student up close to their level of knowledge. But a true teacher is someone who would inspire the student to learn, and the student could surpass the teacher. The student can become the teacher. So it's to inspire that student to learn on their own. And that's the type of teaching that I want done at Faith Shalom. It's the type of teaching that I want to do. So when I come to you, I want the freedom to be able to express ideas and share with you thoughts that I'm having. But these thoughts and these ideas are intended to inspire in you to learn and to stimulate your thoughts, to provoke you to want to draw closer to the Father, to want to learn more of the Scriptures, not necessarily to try to understand what I know. And I'm not trying to convey an idea as if what I know is ultimate truth, that I have the answer key. Because when it comes to Torah, it's a book that's bigger than any of us. And there's no one human being that has the answer key. So we have to look beyond ourselves to find those answers. So it's real important to me that I have the freedom to speak as if what I'm speaking is fact, because in my world, this is what I believe right now. But I'm not presenting these as facts that you need to believe. These are a fact in my world, in my life, and I'm presenting it as such. However, everything is subject to your interpretation and your further study of these truths, if you will. Okay? So I just want to get that out first. So this puts the pressure off of you feeling like you're going to get brainwashed. If I say something that challenges maybe a theological point of view that you have, I'm not trying to control anyone's mind by being the speaker up here. Anything and everything I say can be questioned. And so it opens that door up, gives me the freedom to be able to speak openly, and it gives you as the listener to be able to listen openly. We're to be sifters, so sift out what is good. Let all that is bad just go through the sifter and just hang on to the good particles, okay? So listen for the message that hopefully the Father is delivering a message through me to each one of you as individuals. So if that is the case, some of the words that I'm speaking may be meant for someone else. There may be something that's dealing with that person. Maybe it doesn't strike you well, but just receive the message that way, okay? And I know you guys have heard that before, but I just want to reiterate it because I want that message to be as we grow, when people are having conversations over the, by the water cooler or whatever, that message goes out. When people say, well, I don't know about this thing that he said, and he acts like he knows it all. Well, maybe I haven't delivered this message to that person yet, so you guys can convey it, okay? And that's really the stance that I want of anyone who stands back here. Okay, so with that being said, I'm going to make a statement here, and again, this is a message before the message. So I'm going to get into the parsha, and I have some stuff there that I really want to bring out, but I think this is important to lay some groundwork. So this here is another, I'm going to make a statement that can sound really theologically challenged, but please keep in mind everything that I just said as I make this statement. So the title of this brief message here, messagette, or whatever you want to call it, is Torah is not law. Okay, so let me talk a little bit more about this. Okay, and where I'm coming from. So I hope I have something that I'm trying to convey with this message, that I hope that you get what I'm trying to say, and you don't just get hung up on what I'm saying, but I'm trying to convey a message and putting words together to try to get this thought through. So look for the message under the words. Okay. All right. So here's what we all know. We are a group of individuals here that would be referred to as Torah observant, which means that we accept the Torah as law for today, and that we believe that it still has authority in our lives for today, and we're trying to understand and live out Torah in our lives. But one of the things that we run into often when we speak to our Christian brothers and sisters is that the law is done away with, and they view Torah as law, and we actually contradict this theology. The way that they view, that they define Torah as law. Early on in the foundations of learning Torah, we come to this understanding that when Paul is speaking of law, it's not necessarily speaking of God's instructions. And so we translate Torah as instructions. Okay, so Christianity defines it as law and says that the law is done away with. See, the temple is no more, there are no sacrifices, and the Levitical priesthood is not there. So if we only look at Torah as law, if we do translate the word as law, and we only look at it as law, there's some difficulty in communicating a message because there is no temple, there is no Levitical priesthood, so there's a real challenge. When we lock our minds into Torah equals law, we really have some difficulty handling those issues. And then also, to further complicate the problem, we have within Judaism, the rabbis have taken Torah and broken it down into 613 commandments. And these commandments are written out like a legal code. They're commandments in which we have to perform these. It's like a legal code, right? So they give this idea through the 613 that Torah is law. Okay? But we have to stop looking at Torah as law. It contains laws. And here's another thing, the complicated part of the word law in English is law has a double meaning. Because motion is a law, right? But it's not the same kind of law that do not speed is a law. If we take Torah and we put it in a box and we call it law, and we translate that law as do not speed law, it gives us a totally different walk than if we realize that Torah is instructions that contains laws, and some of those laws are motion is a law, gravity, believe in gravity, and do not speed. So there are do not speed laws in Torah. There are motion type laws, laws of science and physics. There's laws of the universe, laws of if you do this, this will happen. It's a law. But there's ultimately, Torah is instructions. In the beginning is Torah. The words in the beginning are in Torah. But what law do we get from that? What legal code do we get from that? There's a problem in our movement because there are individuals who are hooking onto the law portion of Torah. And they're so focused on trying to understand the law and implement law and be lawyers that they're losing the instructions. So, everybody here seen The Karate Kid?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, if The Karate Kid would not have questioned wax on, wax off. Everybody remember that?
Yeah.
Wax on, wax off. Would we know why he got, would we know why? Okay? So remember, he got sick of washing the old man's car, right? So the old man was like, wash the car, wax on, wax off. Remember? And he got so tired of it. He got so angry because he wanted to learn karate, and all he was doing was washing the car. Okay? So what was his perception at that time? In the movie, we kind of attached to his perception. The perception is, I came to learn karate and he's making me wash his car. So yeah, he's the master, I'm the student, I'm supposed to respect him and do what he asks, but this is ridiculous. I'm not here to wash your car, I want to learn karate. And so he gets angry and he goes and he confronts and he says, I'm sick and tired of washing your car. And then he goes through the lesson, wax on, wax off. And he does. And then you see, as the watcher of the movie, you see, oh, he was learning karate while he was washing the car. But let's just imagine for a moment that the student, the Karate Kid, never questioned. He didn't get angry. He just did what he was told to do. He didn't go and we didn't have the confrontation in the movie. He didn't want to know why. He didn't get mad about it. So we didn't get the lesson. We didn't get the wax on, wax off, and he did all the blocks. We don't see that. We just see that he washes the car. And he never enters in a fight. So he never gets in a position where he has to wax on and wax off in a fight. He never makes the connection with what he learned from it. So he completes his training, he graduates, and now he's qualified to be a teacher. But he's never learned the wax on, wax off. Is it possible that at that point, the Karate Kid could realize and could think to himself, when I was a student, it was appropriate for my master to have me wash his car. And as a student, it was my job to learn respect for my master and to do what he asked me to do, and so I washed his car. And he told me he was adamant about wax on, wax off. So he gets to say to me, this is how I want my car washed. So now that I am the teacher, I can make my students wash my car, and I can make them wash it the way I want. And I want mine washed with cold water and a green sponge. So he makes his students wash with a cold water and a green sponge. And the student gets sick and tired of it, goes to him and says, I'm not washing your car, I'm sick of washing your car, I came to learn karate. What's the response? Does he go to punch him and say green sponge and the kid blocks something? No. The response is, I'm your master, you're going to do what I told you to do. Right? And then the kid quits and he never learns karate. So The point is that those instructions, they were very detailed instructions. There was a very detailed wax on, wax off. It was a very specific way in which he was to do it. But what he was learning was something that was going to help him in karate. He didn't understand it at the time. And Torah is this way sometimes in our life. Sometimes there's a lesson in there. We have to go through the exercise, even though we don't understand why we do things. We have to go through the exercise, and then there will come a time in our life where that exercise will get applied and we'll realize why that the learning will happen internally. We will know how to react to a situation because of the exercise. Even though the exercise as we went through it didn't make sense. But we're in real danger if we just focus on the exercise and try to understand it. And try to determine, and we put a definition or a requirement around the exercise. So this is something that's happening within what they call the Hebrew Roots movement, Torah observant. This is something that I believe is happening within our movement is there are individuals who are looking at a law in Torah and they're trying to determine why that law is there. They're coming based on some assumption or some personal bias preference. They're making a determination of why that law is there, and now they're wanting to hold over their interpretation of that law over someone else and how you carry out that law, how you understand and perceive that law. And I think what we can do to confront this is we need to look at Torah not as an intellectual book. This is living. Okay, it's living. It's living water. It's alive. It flows. It's not stagnant. It's not an intellectual book. So it's not meant to change your thoughts. It's meant to change who you are. And it's not a mere riddle or a puzzle. Okay, it's not a mere riddle or a puzzle. There's not one defining answer that needs to be figured out, and the smartest one of all of us is going to get to that conclusion. We're going to find the answer, we're going to get to ring the bell. I figured it out. It's not a mere riddle or puzzle, it's more of an obstacle course. So if you go through an obstacle course one time, all right, if you go through an obstacle course one time and you've completed it, as far as strength and health, what good has it done you? You go through an obstacle course one time. As far as strength and health, what good has it done you? None. What has it done for you? What can you do with that? If you complete an obstacle course one time, gloat. Thank you. That's all you can do is brag. That's what I wrote, brag. I mean, that's pretty much all you can do is say, I completed it. If you go through the scripture one time, what do you have? I completed it. I've read it. But as far as health, fitness, and strength, you have to revisit the course. You have to go through the obstacle course over and over and over again. Has anyone here ever been through an obstacle course? Any type of an obstacle course? Okay. So, when you go through an obstacle course, the second time you go through that course, is it the exact same experience as the first time? Everyone agrees, no. So, sometimes when you go through it the second time, one of the obstacles that was a real challenge to you the first time is again a real challenge to you. That particular obstacle is a challenge for you. Every time you go through the course, you continue to struggle with this one thing. But something else that happens is there's a change in the dynamics. So as you go through the obstacle course one time, you may not have any problem whatsoever getting through the tires. But the next time you go through it, for some reason you keep stumbling in the tires. So sometimes an obstacle that was easy to you earlier now becomes challenging. Sometimes if the obstacle course is outside, sometimes the obstacle course becomes more difficult because it's raining and now you have to deal with mud, so there's a change in the environment. If it's inside, maybe you're going through the obstacle course on a day when you didn't get a full night's sleep the night before. Maybe you're not well hydrated. There are several things that change. There's so much that can go on that affects that. But in order for you to become healthier, or in order for you to strengthen, regardless of why you're going through the obstacle, most people do obstacle courses because they're trying to build strength, or they're trying to increase their health. But whichever reason that you're doing it, in order for you to get the benefit of it, you have to continue to go through it and endure all these different challenges. And through those struggles is where the strength and the health come from. And this is very similar to our walk with Torah. So when we go through and we apply these, and we go through these scriptures, when we go through our annual cycle, every year as I go through the Torah portions, something new is revealed to me. There's a new challenge that's presented to me in my daily life that relates somehow to something that the Spirit is speaking to me through that week's Parsha. And so we need a regular routine where we regularly go through, and we have to go through the obstacle course. You can't just read it and put it aside. This has to get into your life, get into who you are, and affect your very being. Okay? Alright, so that is just a message that came out of this week's Parsha, but I can't really connect it to the Parsha. So I can't go in and pull things out of the Hebrew and say this is where I got this from. But as I was going through just reading and things, this is what was laid upon my heart. So now that all that is said, let's get into a message straight from the Parsha. There's a little bit of mind stimuli in here because there's some cool stuff with playing on the Hebrew and back and forth and that kind of thing. So I'm kind of excited about this. I feel a interpretation that's deep in my gut that I don't know if I can get it out. So once again, just hopefully the Spirit will take this message and speak something to you that apply to your life. Because I have a message that I'm going to come out of here, but there's so much more to it. It's kind of like eating like some fine dining, and you're like, I can pick up a little bit of sage, and there's some cheese in there, and there's so much more, and you just can't quite put your finger on it, but you just know it's there, and it's just so satisfying, and you can't convey that experience about how good this is, and how it's truly just igniting your taste buds. So that's kind of where I'm at with this, is it's like, you know, spiritual flavor explosion, but I'm just picking up on a few things. So, all right, so let us go to our Parsha for this week. We're going to pick up with the end of last week, and we are going to go to Exodus chapter 9, verse 27. And this is, last week we covered 7 plagues, and the last one being the hail. And this is coming to the end of last week's Parsha. It says in verse 27, Then Pharaoh summoned Moshe and Aaron. This time I have sinned. He said to them, Yahweh is in the right, and I and my people are in the wrong. Pray to Yahweh, for we have had enough thunder and hail. I will let you go. You don't have to stay any longer. Then we enter into this week's Parsha. So there's a division here. As the Parshas are divided up, we have the first 7 plagues and then the last 3. And there is a division of, you know, we don't have one Parsha that's the 10 plagues, right? We have 7 and then we have 3. And last week we picked up on a division and talked about why it was divided right here. This week we're going to touch on another point. So I'm going to bring up the fact that after plague number 7, Pharaoh admits with his mouth that he has sinned. So Yeshua at the Passover Seder said, do this in remembrance of me. So he connects our salvation experience with the Exodus experience. And what happens prior to your salvation experience? What do we do? If you're going to go through it, if you're praying with somebody and they say that they want to accept Jesus as their personal Lord and Savior, what do you do? What do you have to do?
Confess your sin.
confession. You confess your sins. You have to affirm and confess that you're a sinner. So the first thing is to acknowledge that you sin. Then it's to repent, which is to sin no more. This is where we have some debate. But Pharaoh says, this time I have sinned. Yahweh is right, and I and my people are in the wrong. So, as we relate this experience of salvation with the experience of the Exodus, we have here a sinner confessing his sins. But what happens at the end of last week's Parsha? Does he repent? So he confesses, but when it comes to repentance, he at this point, after the first 7 plagues, acknowledges that Yahweh is God, Yahweh is in the right, and that he has sinned and he is in the wrong, but then he says, I reject you. So now, the last 3 is for the juggler. The last 3 plagues is a direct attack. It is a complete and total annihilation. What we have in chapter 10, then Yahweh said to Moses, go to Pharaoh, or come to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the hearts of his officials, so that I may perform these miraculous signs of mine among them. Alright, and last year we talked about the hardening of the heart. That it wasn't that Yahweh took his free will away from him and caused him to be rebellious. He had the free will to choose, but Yahweh's dealing with him was more in your face. It wasn't, it's like going to a prideful male and saying, you can't pick up that chair. The next thing he's going to do is pick up the chair, right? So it's a in your face and pushing upon his pride. It's like, I'm not going to let up. I'm going to get right in there and I'm going to touch you where it's in your sore spot. And it caused Pharaoh to, at any moment, he could have humbled himself. He could have acknowledged his sin, repent, and turn from his ways. If he would have let the people go, we would have had a different story. But Yahweh knew all things. So, like we talked about just a couple weeks ago, we have the ability to write a story. And we know when we write a story the end of the story. But we do not have the ability to give our characters free will and still get the story to end where we know it's going to end. We don't have that ability, so we can't understand how an all-knowing God who knows the beginning and the end can still allow us to have free will when he knows the end. We can't comprehend this. But what we have here is a situation where Pharaoh has free will, but Yahweh already knew the outcome. He knew how strong his pride was, and by pushing on his sore muscle, he knew he was going to flex it. So, then you may tell, alright, so here's just a little side note. The reason, chapter 10, verse 2, that you may tell your children and grandchildren how I dealt harshly with the Egyptians and how I performed my signs among them, and that you may know that I am Yahweh. Okay? So, I'm really going to deal with this. We're going to drop down to verse 4 and 5 and get into this, but I'm dealing with this that Pharaoh has hardened his heart. We have gone to the point of total annihilation now. It's over for Pharaoh. This is becoming the end of Egypt. And it is that you may tell your children and grandchildren how I dealt harshly with the Egyptians and how I performed my signs among them, and that you may know that I am Yahweh. Okay, so let's drop down here to verse 4, and let's jump right into this. Let my people go, so that they may worship me. If you refuse to let them go, okay, let me pull my notes out here. Right here at the end of verse 4, if you refuse to let them go, I'm going to bring these Arba in your, is that borders? I think it's borders. I misspelled it. Arba in your borders, they're going to cover the ayin of haaretz. You'll be unable to ra'ah aretz. Okay? So, now I'm going to break these words down because I threw some Hebrew in there on you. I'm going to bring these arba. Arba is translated here as locust. Mike, you got your Tanakh?
Mm-hmm.
So, if we flip over to Genesis, just you, Mike, or anyone who has Hebrew in their Bible, if you flip over to Genesis 22, are both of you in the Tanakh? It's page 40. And if you go about 3/4 of the way down the page, in verse 17, the first, second, third, fourth, what's the fifth word of verse 17 there in Hebrew?
Fourth word?
Fifth word.
The fifth word?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yeah.
Ravash?
It's
Arba.
Arba. Arba. Arba. Aleph, Resh, Bet, Hey. Which is the exact same word. If you go back in your Tanakh, in your Hebrew scriptures, if you go back to this week's Parsha in verse 4, locust is Arba. And in the Tanakh, it's the exact same letters, exact same vowel. Arba. And we know the original, there was no vowel point, so we just have to look at the consonants. But in this Hebrew, it has them voweled, even voweled the same. But over in Genesis, it's translated as increase, multiply. So we're relating here to the story of Abraham and Isaac, the binding of Isaac. And after the angel stopped Abraham, he says to him, on the wrong page, hold on. There we go. The angel of Yahweh called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, By myself I swear, Yahweh declares, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your favored one, I will bestow my blessing upon you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars of heaven and the sands of the seashore. I will bestow my blessing upon you and make your descendants Arba, numerous as the stars of heaven and the sands of the seashore. So we've got the same Hebrew word here. In fact, I'm not the most skilled in my Hebrew. In fact, I'm lowly skilled. But there are, this thought was stimulated by teaching by Rabbi Foreman on Aleph Beta. They kind of pointed this out, which led me down a whole series of thoughts, but it was a kernel of seed that they threw out. But they made several connections here with some of the Hebrew words, because sometimes, like the word life in English, the word life is L-I-F-E, right? Well, in the middle of the word is another English word, I-F, if. And sometimes you can do things in the Hebrew language where you can find a word inside a word, and you can also take consonants and vowel them differently. So you go from one place in Scripture and there's the same consonants just voweled differently, and it's a different word translated differently. But you can find these connections by seeing the same word showing up. And there's there's a few words in this story after the binding of Isaac, this section of Scripture that I just read to you, and this telling about the locust. There are several things in there that connect the two stories. So I'm going to go into this a little bit more. So keep in mind that this word that's translated as locust, we're reading this in English. So we're reading locust literally, but sometimes there's some more spiritual things that we can get if we look at it in the original Hebrew. So the Hebrew is arba, which is translated as locust, but the root of arba is a word that deals with abundance, multiplying, greatness. Okay? So if we go back to Exodus chapter 1, I didn't give you guys that scripture earlier. I can just read it to you. Exodus chapter 1, verse 8. A new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, "Look, the Israelite people are much too numerous for us. Let us deal shrewdly with them so that they may not increase. Otherwise, in the event of war, they may join our enemies in fighting against us and rise from the ground." So they set taskmasters over them, rise from the ground. They set taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor, and they build garrison cities for Pharaoh, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they oppressed, the more they increased and spread out, so that the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. Okay, so here's one of the concerns of Egypt, is in their multitude. But what is the blessing, the Arabah, to Abraham? Yahweh said, "I will Arabah, increase your descendants." Oh, there's so much stuff here. How do I get into all this?
This is a chiastic structure.
There is. There's so much going on here. So much that I want to talk about just in this.
He did the
This little
opposite
part.
of what Pharaoh
Um,
he annihilated the Egyptians.
I'm going to try to pull all this stuff together. Okay, so I am going to bring these Arabah in your borders. They're going to cover the, what's that word there in the Hebrew? If you're looking at it in the Tanakh, Exodus 10:5, they're going to cover the, that's Ain. And what does Ain mean? Eye. Not face, eye. They're going to cover the eye of the Eretz, earth. Okay, it's translated as earth. The word is Eretz. The root of Eretz is be firm. Firmament, be firm, hardness. This is where we get the word earth in Hebrew, is from that place of firmness, hardness. But the word Eretz can also be translated as a country or a nation. It can be a land, not just the earth, as in dirt. It can also be land or country or nation. So if I say come out of your nation, that's different than come out of the earth, because if we hear this in English, we think out of the earth, of the earth, we think something coming out of the ground. But if I say of your nation, it's of you, right? So, so keep that in mind. And he says, you'll be unable to ra'ah, you'll be unable to see the land. So here we have this, cover the eye of the earth. It's going to cover the eye of the earth. And you'll be unable to see the land. So you got the earth, the eye of the earth not being able to see. It's covered. And then you're not able to see the land. Okay, you see this? There's a division between these things. Now, here's a crazy thing. When you think of Egypt and Egypt's beliefs and symbols of Egypt's, what's one of the first symbols that pop into mind?
Eye. Off
The
dollar,
eye.
off the dollar bill.
Yeah, the eye. The all-seeing eye. So what would the eye of the earth be? Right? So there's a connection here. There's a connection here, and I'm going to pull this out. But the eye of the earth, if they're in their belief system, they have a belief in this all-seeing eye. What is the all-seeing eye? How much do we know about the all-seeing eye?
Pagan eye.
Anybody know the name of the all-seeing eye?
Is it
Osiris?
Yeah. So Osiris or
Isis.
not Isis.
Iris.
It relates there, but it's Ra. So there's a connection with the all-seeing eye and Ra, which is really funny because it says you'll be unable to. Okay, so imagine in your mind the movie where it's the booming voice that echoes in a stadium or something. Imagine the booming voice that echoes in a stadium where he says, "Here I am," right?
Yeah.
big booming voice. So if you're in a, if you're an Egyptian and you're engaged in worship, in a worship service to the sun, which you call, you can imagine the announcer coming out, behold, right? So here we have, you'll be unable to raw the land. I mean, it's almost, to me, it's almost like this punch in the gut I'm going to cover the land. So out of the earth, out of the cosmos, out of the environment, they believe that there's an all-seeing eye. The all-seeing eye was for protection. The all-seeing eye was for blessing and abundance. So their belief and their hope system is in this mystical, all-seeing eye, this false deity that they put their trust in. So what I'm suggesting to you is Pharaoh says, I have sinned, Yahweh is right and I am wrong, but I still believe in what I believe in. And because of my belief and my provisions come from the all-seeing eye, my provisions come from my deity that I have chosen, I am rejecting this God. And at this point, it's over. And his fear was that the Israelites would what? What are two problems that you have with a multitude? One of the problems you have with a multitude is the resources that it takes to provide for that multitude. And the other problem you have is the takeover, that multitude could rise up against you. So Pharaoh's got two issues here. One, they're going to consume too much. And two, they're going to band together and rise up against us and join our enemies and defeat us and leave. But what's the benefit of having a multitude? If you're an employer and you have more employees, what happens? You can get more done. So there's a benefit to having a multitude. By having more slaves or more employees, you have more power because you can impose your power upon the people and get more out of them. So you need more in that sense. So there's a contrast here between a blessing of abundance being a good thing and being a bad thing. Okay? So we're going to put on our scuba gear here. We're going to put on some serious scuba gear.
Brother. More there.
We're going to put on some serious scuba gear and we're going to dive really deep in this concept of blessing, because I've already related this into Genesis with what was the blessing that Yahweh gave to Abraham for obeying Him?
Abundance.
That he will greatly increase the descendants. Okay? Where, if you read Torah, where does provision come from?
Yahweh.
It comes from God. God provides. Where does our food come from?
Yahweh.
Yahweh. Is there any concern in the number of our people, in the multitude? Is there any limit to God's power?
No.
Is there any danger of running out of resources if our provider is Yahweh? Is there a danger of running out of resources if our provider is the earth?
Yes.
Okay? So here's a contrast. Here's a problem. Yahweh says it is a blessing. I am going to bless your descendants. But to the world who does not trust in Yahweh, an abundance of descendants means a using of the resources provided by the earth, who they trust in. So they trust that the earth will produce food for them. And an abundance of people having too many children is a negative thing to those who trust in the world, or trust in magical powers, or trust in all these other things, these other, not necessarily an actual being, but just having a trust in something other than Yahweh. Because if we trust in Him and all of our provisions come from Him, then we have no need to, what does Yeshua say? Don't store up treasures on earth. Because when we take our eyes off of Him as our provider, and we look at other things as our provision, our food is our provision. Our food sustains us for life. If we look at the resources of this world, we have to get our fair share. So herein lies a problem when we have to get our fair share from what the earth produces and provides for us. There's only so many resources. There's only so much space. There's only so much food. And now we have to hoard. We have to gather ours in and hold on tight to it. And those who come around us are there to get what's ours. And now there's a competition. But if everything is provided from Yahweh, if nothing grew out of the ground, if every day all the food that we needed rained down, let's call it manna, and it rained down, landed on the ground, and every day we went out, and it didn't matter how much we gathered, we ended up with exactly what we needed for our family. Every single day. Would that not have the power of influencing our brain to realize that I don't have to hoard? I'm not in competition with my brother, and an abundance is not a bad thing. An abundance of people is a blessing. But what do we do when we get engaged in the world? What is a blessing? Is it not an abundance of things? But what does Yahweh do when He blesses Abraham? He blesses him with a multitude of descendants. What was he rewarded for? He was rewarded because he did not withhold his only son. This idea of hoarding, this idea of holding on, mine, this idea of having a trust within this realm, within this world, having a trust within this world, this idea, he did not withhold his only son because everything came from Yahweh. He acknowledged that through his actions. Everything comes from Yahweh. I'm not going to lose anything. He had faith. It wasn't that he was looking to kill his son for his God and his beliefs and his theology. He knew that Isaac, he knew that his seed was going to be preserved. He knew that God did not require life. He knew that. So he knew this thing is going to work out because everything comes from God anyway. If I am your father and I am financially well off, and you can come to me anytime you want and get more money, are you worried about something that costs $5? Do you care about spending $5 because you know that you can go back to the source and get more? So it's this idea of realizing that our provision comes from our Father. Now our Father will divvy out the portions that He determines that we need. This is our complicated part. This is what's so complicated for us because a lot of times we think we need more than what He thinks we need. And when He doesn't give us what we think we need, then we have a shortage. And now there's a problem. We're not content with what He provides for us. We think that we need more, which turns our eyes and focus off of Him as the provider because He didn't provide what I wanted. He didn't provide me enough, so He's not my provider. I've got to go out and do it myself. So we're going right. And what is Abraham? Abraham sacrifices his only son, and what happens in the 10th plague? It's the death of the firstborn. This is the road that Pharaoh is on by rejecting. He's saying, you know what? You are God, you are right, but I reject you as my God. I still believe in what? I still believe in the heritage, the religion. What does he say right here in Exodus 10? Right after, let's finish this up. Exodus 10, verse 4, 5. They shall cover the surface of the land so that no one will be able to see the land. They shall devour the surviving remnant that was left to you after the hail. Okay? And we read about the hail destroyed everything. But right here, Yahweh says, you've blown it, buddy. You're done. You have now acknowledged that you're a sinner. You now realize that I am God and you still reject me? I left you. I left to you a remnant. I left you something to build upon. I left you hope. I provided hope for you. There was a remnant left, but now, no more. It's gone. And they shall eat away all your trees, which trees can be wood, it can be, okay? So this word for tree is not necessarily tree. It's sticks, twigs, anything that grow in the fields. Moreover, they shall fill your palaces and your houses of all your courtiers and all the Egyptians. Something that neither your father nor fathers' fathers have seen from the day they appeared on earth to this day. So what is your father's fathers? This is your heritage. Where did he get his religion from? Where did he get his belief system from? Okay, so they're looking back to their ancestors. Pharaohs were put into a place of deity. So he's looking back to the previous pharaohs for protection. And he's saying, this is going to be so bad. I mean, everything you believe in has not experienced. You're stepping into whole another ground here. You, as man, are acknowledging that I am God and still saying you can beat me. Because part of this belief system of the all-seeing eye, there is within that mythology, there is this instance where humans, I think it was Horus was the god, I think he was the one that had mercy on them. But anyway, there was humans who rose up and rebelled against God and prevailed. Okay? And then the God that they prevailed against sent his daughter, so it was wrong. So it sends the daughters down to devour, to punish the people. And here's some crazy stuff that's all mixed in here. So when she comes down to devour, it's said that she came down, in their mythology, that she came down as a lioness licking up the blood. There's these words in there. So here's what the adversary does. There's one truth. The one truth is that Yahweh is God. There's only one God.
Right.
So all truth exists. You can get into different aspects of mythology, and you're going to find connections. You're going to find connections with the sun, the moon representing resurrection. So we get into our religion, and we talk about the rising, and we find these connections within our religion, but then we see that other religions have made the same connection. So maybe we're just one of a bunch of religions. Maybe there's not any truth to this. Maybe, every religion believes this stuff. They just have different names for their gods. No, the problem is that they have been slightly twisted.
No.
Because there is truth. There is truth. There is one God. But the adversary and man, working in cooperation with him, wants to distort that. They want to give God a different name. They like multiple gods. They like having the ability to say, well, I'm mad at this God, so I'm going to go serve this God, and this God's going to protect me from that God. They like having this ability. They don't want to rely on God for the provision. They want to be selfish. We talked about this before. The appeal of idolatry is you can be all about yourself. And you offer up a tribute to your God in hopes that your God will grant you favor and you will get what you want. And this infiltrates